The morning mist hung low over the Scottish Highlands like a grey blanket. Elias MacLeod stood on the stone walls of her village, watching the horizon with sharp green eyes. In her hands she held the most precious thing her family owned, an ancient spear that had been passed down through 5 generations of warrior women. The spear wasn't like other weapons. Its blade caught the light in strange ways, and the metal seemed to hum with old magic. Her grandmother had told her stories about how it was forged from metal that fell from the stars. Blessed by the old wise men who knew secrets that were now forgotten, every woman in her family line had carried this spear into battle, and none had ever been defeated while holding it. But today felt different. The wind carried a smell that made her stomach turn, the scent of burning wood and something worse. Ravens flew in circles overhead, cawing warnings that made the hair on her arms stand up. The animals in the forest had gone quiet, which never meant anything good. "They're coming," whispered her younger cousin Beth, climbing up beside her on the wall. The girl's face was pale with fear. Old Robert saw their ships on the loch this morning. Vikings, with painted shields and iron axes. Elias gripped her spear tighter. She had heard the stories about these northern raiders who came across the sea like wolves, taking whatever they wanted. They had burned 3 villages already this season, stealing people to sell as slaves and leaving nothing but ashes behind. "How many ships?" she asked, though her voice stayed calm. As the last guardian of her clan, she couldn't let anyone see her fear. 5 big ones, Beth whispered. "Maybe more coming." Elias closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Her father had died in the last raid 2 years ago. Her mother had gotten sick and passed away during the harsh winter. She was all that stood between her people and the raiders, who wanted to destroy everything they had built. The village below was already stirring. Women were hiding their children and gathering their most precious belongings. The men were checking their weapons and looking to her for guidance. They believed in the old stories about her family's spear, believed it would protect them like it had protected their grandparents and great-grandparents. "Tell everyone to get ready," she said to Beth. The usual plan. Women and children, too, the hidden caves, fighting men on the walls. But this time we're not just defending. We're going to make these raiders sorry they ever set foot on our land. The next few hours passed like a strange dream. Elias moved through the village, checking on preparations and trying to calm people's fears. The blacksmith gave her extra arrows. The healer packed supplies for treating wounds. The priest said prayers over the weapons, mixing the new faith with the old traditions that had kept them alive for so long. When the Viking ships finally appeared on the water, they looked like monsters rising from the depths. The painted dragons on their prows seemed to snarl at the shoreline. Elias could hear the raiders singing their war songs, voices carrying across the water like the howling of wolves. "Remember," she called to her people as the first boats reached. "The shore, they think we're weak because we're few. Let's show them how wrong they are." The battle began when the sun was directly overhead. The Vikings came up the hill like a flood of iron and fury, their axes glinting in the light. They were bigger than the Scottish fighters, with blonde braids and scars that told stories of many battles. Their leader wore a helmet shaped like a wolf's head and carried a sword that looked like it could cut through stone. But Elias and her people knew every rock and tree on their land. They used the narrow paths to their advantage, forcing the raiders to come at them in small groups. Her spear seemed to dance in her hands, its point finding gaps in armor that shouldn't have existed. Every thrust was perfect. Every block came at just the right moment. For a while, it looked like the old magic would hold. The Vikings were surprised by how fiercely the villagers fought. Several raiders fell, and others began to look worried. Elias felt the power of her ancestors flowing through her, felt connected to all the women who had carried this spear before her. Then everything went wrong. The Viking leader had been watching her fight, studying how she moved. When she was surrounded by 3 of his men, he made his move. His sword came down like lightning, and Elias raised her spear to block it. The impact should have turned his blade aside like it had turned aside 100 others. Instead, there was a sound like thunder. It's the ancient spear, blessed by druids and forged from star metal, cracked right down the middle. The magic that had protected 5 generations of women died in an instant. The pieces of the broken weapon fell from Elise's hands like the fragments of a shattered dream. The Vikings saw what happened and roared with triumph. Without the spear's protection, Elias was just another fighter, and she was already tired from the long battle. A blow from an axe handle sent her stumbling backward. Another hit knocked her to the ground. Around her, she could hear her people crying out in despair. The breaking of the Guardian's spear was more than just losing a weapon. It was losing the heart of who they were. Some of the villagers threw down their weapons and ran. Others kept fighting, but their movements were clumsy with fear. Elias tried to get back up, but her head was spinning and her vision was blurry. The broken pieces of her spear lay scattered around her like the bones of some ancient creature. She reached for them with shaking hands, as if somehow she could put them back together through will alone. The last thing she remembered before darkness took her was the sound of her village burning and the feeling that she had failed everyone. Who had ever trusted her when she woke up? The world was quiet in a way that felt wrong. No birds singing, no children laughing, no sounds of daily life. It's just the crackling of dying fires and the whisper of wind through empty houses. She was lying under a blanket that wasn't hers, in a place she didn't recognize. Her head throbbed, like someone was hammering inside her skull, and every muscle in her body ached. But the worst pain came from seeing the broken pieces of her spear lying nearby, cold and lifeless as stones. "You're awake," said a voice she didn't know. A man stepped into view, tall and strong-looking, with kind eyes and hands that were stained with soot from working at a forge. Everything about him seemed careful and gentle, which surprised her. Most men she knew were loud and rough around the edges. "Who are you?" she asked, though talking made her head hurt worse. "Where is everyone?" The man's face grew sad. "I'm Duncan Campbell," he said quietly. "I found you after the raiders left. Your people. Some escaped to the caves like you planned. Others—" He didn't finish the sentence, but she understood. Campbell. The name hit her like a physical blow. The Campbells had been enemies of her, clan for longer than anyone could remember. Their great-grandfathers had killed each other over stolen cattle and broken promises. Their grandfathers had burned each other's fields. Their fathers had fought bitter feuds that left scars on both. Families. Why? Was all she could manage to say. Why had he helped her when he should have left her to die? Why was he being kind when their families had taught their children to hate each other? Duncan looked at the broken spear, then back at her face. "Because leaving someone to die when you could help them, that's not who I want to be," he said. "Simply, enemy or not, you fought to protect innocent people. That means something." Elias closed her eyes, feeling tears she didn't want to shed burning behind her eyelids. The spear was broken. Her village was destroyed. Half her people were dead or taken as slaves. And now she owed her life to someone whose family name she had been taught to curse. But maybe. In a world where everything else had fallen apart, old, hatreds didn't matter as much as simple human kindness. Maybe this was where her real story was just beginning. 3 days passed before Elias could stand without feeling like the world was spinning around her. Duncan had made a small camp in the ruins of an old shepherd's hut, far enough from her destroyed village that the smoke didn't burn her eyes. Anymore? He brought her water from a clean stream and shared his simple food without asking for anything in return. She didn't trust him. How could she? Every story her grandmother had ever told her painted the Campbells as liars and thieves. But Duncan's actions didn't match the stories. He tended her wounds with gentle hands, kept the fire burning through the cold nights, and never once tried to take advantage of her weakness. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked on the 3rd morning, watching him stir a pot of thin stew over the fire. "What do you want?" Duncan looked up from his cooking, and she saw something sad flicker across his face. "I had a sister once," he said quietly. "Younger than you. Raiders took her when I was away learning the blacksmith's trade. At the time I got home, she was gone forever." He ladled the stew into a wooden bowl and handed it to her. "When I found you lying there, hurt and alone, all I could think about was how I wished someone had helped her. Maybe if a stranger had shown kindness instead of walking away, she might still be alive." Elias felt her chest tighten. She had expected him to want something gold, information about her clan's defenses, maybe even her as a prisoner to trade. But this reason, this simple human pain that echoed her own losses, was harder to argue with. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "Losing family ... it changes everything." "It does," Duncan agreed. "Makes you realize that some things matter more than old grudges." That afternoon, a young boy stumbled into their camp, tears streaming down his dirty face. Elias recognized him, little Thomas from the village, barely 8 years old. "Should I have been safe in the caves with the other children?" "They took them," he cried, throwing himself into Elias's arms. "The bad men came back and found our hiding place. They took all the children and some of the women too. They said they're going to sell them across the sea." Elias felt her blood turn to ice. Children were supposed to be safe. That was the whole point of the caves. They had hidden there during raids for generations. "How did they find you?" she whispered. "Someone told them," Thomas sobbed. "A man with scars on his face. He knew exactly where to look." Duncan's expression grew dark. "A traitor," he said grimly. "Someone who's been watching your village for a long time." Leah stood up too quickly, and the world tilted around her. But anger burned away her dizziness. Those children trusted her to protect them. Little Beth, who brought her flowers every spring. Young William, who dreamed of becoming a warrior. Sweet Anne, who still believed in fairy tales. "I have to go." "After them," she said, reaching for where her spear should have been. Her hand closed on empty air, and the reality of her situation crashed over her again. No weapon, no clan, no magic to protect her. "You can barely walk," Duncan pointed out gently. "What would you fight them with? Your bare hands? If I have to," she snapped. "Those children are my responsibility." "Then let me help you." Words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Elias stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception. "Why would you do that? They're not your people." "Children are everyone's people," Duncan said simply. "Besides, these raiders aren't just your problem anymore. Word came from my village yesterday. They're planning something bigger, an attack on both our clans at once." He pulled out a leather pouch and showed her its contents. Inside were pieces of metal, unlike anything she had ever seen, dark as night, but shot through with veins of silver that seemed to move in the light. "This is star metal," he said. "Rare as dragon's teeth. I was bringing it to trade when I found you." Elias gasped. Star metal was what her spear had been made from generations ago. "Where did you get this? A merchant from the far north?" "He said it fell from the sky near the Icelands, and that it was meant for making weapons of power." Duncan's voice grew uncertain. "I was thinking, maybe I could try to forge you a new spear. Not the same as your family's weapon, but something that might help." The offer took her breath away. Star metal was worth more than most people saw in a lifetime. For him to give it to her, to spend his skill and time creating a weapon for someone whose family was supposed to be his enemy, it was either the greatest act of kindness she had ever seen, or the most elaborate trap. "I don't understand you," she said honestly. "Your people and mine have hated each other for so long that no one even remembers how it started. Why would you help me save children you've never met?" Duncan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Maybe because I'm tired of hating," he said finally. "Maybe because when I see you hurting, I don't think about clans or feuds. I just see someone who needs help." Something warm and unexpected bloomed in Elias's chest. When was the last time someone had looked at her and seen just a person, instead of a guardian or a warrior or a symbol of her family's honor? Duncan saw her pain, her fear for the children, her desperate need to make things right. He saw her. "As human, the children don't have much time," she said quietly. "Raiders usually sell captives at the big market across the water. If we're going to save them, we need to move fast." "Then we'll move fast," Duncan agreed. "But first, you need to get your strength back, and I need to forge you a weapon. Can't rescue anyone if we're not prepared." Over the next 2 days, Duncan worked with an intensity that amazed her. He built a forge from stones and scrap metal, crafted bellows from leather and wood, and gathered the special ingredients needed. To work with star metal, Elias watched him labor from dawn to dusk. his strong hands shaping tools and his dark eyes focused with absolute concentration. She found herself studying the way he moved, efficient and graceful like a dancer who happened to work with fire and iron. When he was thinking hard, he bit his lower lip. When something went right, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He was nothing like the rough, brutal Campbell men from her grandmother's stories. "Tell me about your sister," she said one evening as they shared their simple meal. Duncan's hands stilled on his food bowl. Her name was Grace. She had red hair like fire and a laugh that could make anyone smile. She believed the best about everyone, even people who didn't deserve it. His voice grew soft with memory. "She would have liked you, I think. She always said the world needed more brave women." "She sounds wonderful," Aaliyah said gently. "I wish I could have met her." "Me too," Duncan whispered. That night, as she lay under her blanket listening to the fire crackle, Aaliyah found herself thinking about things that had nothing to do with revenge or duty or ancient feuds. She thought about the way Duncan's eyes crinkled when he almost smiled, the careful way he spoke about his lost sister, the calluses on his hands from years of honest work. She was falling for him. It terrified her more than any Viking raid ever could, because loving Duncan Campbell would mean choosing between her heart and everything she had been raised to believe. And with children's lives hanging in the balance, she couldn't afford to make the wrong choice. But as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't stop wondering if maybe, just maybe, love wasn't the wrong choice after all. Maybe it was the only choice that mattered. The old man appeared like a ghost from the morning mist. Aaliyah was gathering herbs by the stream when she looked up and saw him standing there, bent with age, wearing robes that seemed to be made of shadows and starlight. His eyes were the color of deep water, and when he looked at her, she felt like he could see straight through to her soul. "You were the last guardian," he said in a voice like wind through ancient trees, "and you carry a heavy burden." Aaliyah reached for the knife at her belt, but something about the stranger made her pause. He didn't feel dangerous, just old beyond measure and sad in a way that made her heart ache. "Who are you?" she asked carefully. "I am called Father Brendan by some, though I answer to older names as well." The man's smile was gentle. "I am a keeper of the old knowledge, child, the last one who remembers the true laws that governed your people before the new faith came to these lands." Duncan appeared from behind a tree, hammer in hand, ready to protect her. But when he saw the old man, something strange happened. His aggressive stance softened, and he lowered his weapon. "I know you," Duncan said slowly. "You came to our village when I was a boy. You blessed my father's forge." Father Brendan nodded. "I, young Campbell. Even then, you had hands meant for creating rather than destroying." His ancient eyes moved between them. "Fate has woven your paths together in ways neither of you understand." The old man walked closer to their camp, moving with surprising grace despite his age. When he saw the broken pieces of Elias's spear laid out on Duncan's work cloth, he made a sound like a prayer. "So it is true," he whispered. "The guardian's blade has shattered at last." He looked up at Elias with eyes full of sorrow.
Tell me.
"Child, do you know what this truly means?"
What?
"It means I failed," Elias said bitterly.
What?
"It means the protection that kept my family strong for 5 generations is gone forever." "No," Father Brendan said firmly. "It means something far more important is about to begin." He settled down by their fire as if he had been invited, and pulled out a leather pouch filled with dried leaves that smelled like summer rain. As he brewed tea in Duncan's spare pot, he began to speak in the voice of someone sharing ancient secrets. "Long ago, before your great-grandfathers drew their first breath, there was a law written in the stars themselves. When a guardian's weapon breaks beyond normal repair, it can only be reforged by one chosen by the old powers. The smith, who succeeds in this task, becomes bound to the guardian as her protector and equal, sharing her destiny until the end of days." Duncan's hand stilled on the piece of star metal he had been examining. "Bound how?" he asked quietly. "Soul to soul," the old man said simply. "The ritual doesn't just remake the weapon, remakes the smith as well. He gives up his old life, his old loyalties, his old self. In return, he gains power beyond imagining and a purpose that will never leave him empty." Elias felt her heart skip a beat. What exactly are you saying? Father Brendan's eyes were kind but serious. I am saying that if young Duncan succeeds in reforging your spear, he will no longer be Duncan Campbell of the Highland clans. You'll be something new, your chosen one, bound to you by laws older than the stones of this earth. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fears. Duncan stared at the star medal in his hands, as if it had suddenly become a poisonous snake. Elias felt her throat close up with panic. What if he fails? She whispered. Metal will consume him, Father Brendan said gently. Body and soul, there would be nothing left to bury. Duncan set down the medal and walked to the edge of their camp, his shoulders tense with thought. Elias wanted to follow him, to tell him to forget the whole idea, but something in his posture warned her to give him space. It's more you need to know, the old man continued. The ritual can only be performed on the night of the new moon, when the boundary between worlds grows thin. That gives you 3 days to prepare. It must be done in a place of power, somewhere the old magic still runs strong in the earth. I know such a place, Elias said slowly. The sacred grove where my grandmother taught me the old prayers. Both our clans consider it neutral ground. Ah, but will they still consider it neutral when they learn what you plan to do there? Father Brendan asked. Word travels fast in the Highlands, child. Both families are already whispering about the Campbell boy who saved the MacLeod Guardian. Some call it heroic. Others name it treason. As if summoned by his words, the sound of horses came echoing through the trees. Duncan returned quickly to the fire, his face grim. My cousin Robert is coming, he said, with at least 6 men. They must have been tracking me. Father Brendan stood up with surprising speed for such an old man. I will delay them, he said calmly. Tell them I am hearing your confession, and that you must not be disturbed until sunset. That should give you time to escape. Why are you helping us? Elias asked. The old man's smile was sad and beautiful. Because I have seen what comes after. Child, the darkness that will fall on these lands if the old protections fail completely. You two are the only hope for something better. After he melted back into the forest like morning mist, Duncan and Elias packed their few belongings in hurried silence. The sound of approaching horses grew louder. Along with voices, she recognized angry men from Duncan's clan who would see his kindness to her as betrayal. You don't have to do this, she said as they prepared to leave. The ritual, I mean. No one should have to give up who they are for someone else. Duncan stopped packing and looked at her with eyes that held depths. She was only beginning to understand. What if who I am isn't enough? He asked quietly. What if I want to be someone better? You're already better than anyone I've ever known, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. You're kind and brave and good, and you see people instead of just their family names. Don't change that for anything, not even for me. But what about the children? What about stopping these raiders from destroying more villages? Duncan's voice was full of pain. If I don't try the ritual, how many more people will suffer? Elias felt tears burning her eyes. I don't know, she whispered. I just know that. I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you because of me. Duncan reached out and touched her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. And I couldn't live with myself if I had the power to help and chose not to use it, he said. Some things are worth the risk. The voices were getting closer now. They could hear Robert Campbell shouting Duncan's name, demanding that he show himself and explain his actions. There was no more time for talking. They ran through the forest like deer fleeing hunters, their hearts pounding with more than just physical effort. Behind them lay everything they had known, family, clan, the simple certainties of old hatreds. Ahead lay the sacred grove and a choice that would change everything. As they climbed toward the high places where the old magic still whispered in the wind, Elias found herself praying to gods both old and new, not for victory or vengeance, but for wisdom. Because in 3 days, under the dark moon, they would discover whether love was strong enough to rewrite the laws of fate itself, and whether some prices were too high to pay, even for the chance to save the world. The sacred grove stood in a circle of ancient oak trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Moonlight filtered through their leaves like silver water. casting dancing shadows on the stone altar that had been old when the Romans first came to Britain. This was a place where time moved differently, where the boundary between the world of men and the realm of spirits grew thin as spider silk. Duncan had been preparing the ritual fire since sunset, arranging special stones and rare woods according to Father Brendan's careful instructions. His hands shook slightly as he worked, though whether from cold or fear, Elias couldn't tell. She watched him from where she sat on a fallen log, holding the broken pieces of her family's spear in her lap, like the bones of a dead friend. "Are you sure about this?" she asked for the 100th time in 3 days. "Really? Truly sure?" Looked up from where he was carving symbols into the soft earth around the altar. His face was pale in the moonlight, but his eyes held a certainty that made her chest ache. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said quietly. "Have you changed your mind about letting me try?" Elias wanted to say yes. Every part of her screamed to grab his hand and run away from this place, back to some quiet corner of the world where they could be happy and simple and safe. But the memory of little Thomas crying about the stolen children burned in her heart like a flame that wouldn't die. "No," she whispered. "I just wish there was another way." "Maybe there is," said a familiar voice from the edge of the grove. "Father." Brendan emerged from the shadows, but he was not alone. Behind him came a figure that made Elias's blood turn to ice. Her uncle Kenneth, the head of what remained of the MacLeod clan. His weathered face was hard with anger, and his hand rested on the hilt of his sword. "Uncle," Elias said, standing quickly. "What are you doing here?" "I came to stop you from making the biggest mistake of your life," Kenneth said grimly. He looked at Duncan with eyes full of old hatred. "And to kill the Campbell dog who dared to lay hands on my brother's daughter." Duncan rose slowly, keeping his hands visible and empty. "I mean her no harm," he said calmly. "I'm trying to help her." "Help?" Kenneth laughed bitterly. "You want to bind her soul to yours with dark magic? You want to steal the last guardian of our clan and make her your servant?" "That's not what the binding does," Father Brendan said firmly. "The ritual creates equals, not master and servant, two souls joined in common purpose." "Pretty words from a man who serves pagan devils," Kenneth spat. "Elias, come away from here. We'll find another way to rescue the children. We don't need Campbell magic or Campbell lies." Elias felt torn in 2 directions. Her uncle represented everything she had been raised to believe: family loyalty, clan honor, the simple certainties of right and wrong. But Duncan represented something else, something that made her heart race and her spirit soar. The possibility of choosing her own path instead of walking the one laid out for her by generations of dead ancestors. "What other way?" she asked quietly. "How do we fight raiders with iron weapons and stolen children when we have no guardian spear and half our fighting men are dead?" Kenneth's face softened slightly. "We'll ally with other clans, form a larger army. It will take time, but time the children don't have," Duncan interrupted. "I've seen what happens to captives held too long by these raiders. Every day we wait makes their rescue less likely." "And what makes you think this ritual will work any better?" Kenneth demanded. "What makes you think you're worthy to be chosen? By powers you don't understand?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Duncan was quiet for a long moment, staring at the star metal that lay gleaming on the altar. When he spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "Nothing," he said honestly. "Maybe I'm not worthy. Maybe I'll fail and die and leave Elias worse off than before. But I have to try, because the alternative is doing nothing while innocent people suffer." Father Brendan stepped forward, his ancient eyes moving between the 3 younger people like a judge weighing their souls. "The choice must be theirs. Kenneth MacLeod," he said gently. "You cannot force someone to remain unchanged when their heart calls them to transformation. And what about the cost?" Kenneth's voice cracked with emotion. "What about the boys? Family? His clan? Do they have no say in losing him forever?" As if summoned by his words, more figures emerged from the trees. Duncan's cousin Robert led a group of Campbell warriors, their faces grim with determination. At the sight of the MacLeod's, hands moved to sword hilts, and the air grew thick with the promise of violence. "Duncan," Robert called out, "come away from this madness. You're my family, my responsibility. I won't let you throw your life away for some ancient foolishness." It's not foolishness, Duncan said, though his voice wavered slightly. It's the right thing to do. The right thing. Robert's laugh was harsh. The right thing is loyalty too. Your own blood, your own people, not running off to play hero for our enemies. Elias felt the weight of both clans' expectations pressing down on her like a mountain. These men had known Duncan since he was a child. They had taught him to work metal and fight and pray. They loved him in their own rough way, just as her uncle loved her. How could she ask him to leave all of that behind? Maybe we should wait, she said quietly. Think about this more. Find another solution. But Duncan shook his head. There is no other solution, he said firmly, and even if there was, I wouldn't take it. He looked directly at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Don't you understand? This isn't just about the children or the raiders or some ancient law. It's about choosing who I want to be. He gestured toward his clan members. They see me as Duncan Campbell, the blacksmith's son who should be content to make horseshoes and marriage knives for the rest of his life. You see me as someone who could be more, someone who could make a real difference in the world. Father Brendan raised his staff, and the crystal at its tip began to glow with soft, blue light. The moon reaches its darkest point, he announced. If the ritual is to be attempted, it must begin now. The moment of truth had arrived. Elias looked around the grove at all the faces watching her uncle's worry, Robert's anger, the clan warrior's confusion, Father Brendan's patient wisdom. But the face that mattered most was Duncan's, open and trusting, and full of a love that took her breath away. I can't ask you to do this, she whispered. You're not asking, Duncan said, moving to the altar and picking up his forge hammer. Choosing, the star metal began to glow as he raised it toward the moonless sky. Ancient words spilled from Father Brendan's lips in a language older than memory. The very air around them started to hum with power, and Elias felt something vast and patient, turning its attention toward their small gathering. As Duncan brought his hammer down on the glowing metal for the first time, sparks flew up like falling stars. But in those sparks, Elias saw something that made her heart stop, flashes of memory that weren't hers. Duncan as a laughing child learning to work his father's forge, Duncan as a young man mourning his lost sister, Duncan meeting her for the first time, making the choice to help, despite everything he'd been taught. The ritual had begun. And with each strike of his hammer, Duncan was giving pieces of himself to the fire. Soon there would be no going back for either of them. The sound of Duncan's hammer rang through the sacred grove like a bell calling souls to judgment. With each strike against the glowing star metal, the air around them grew thicker with ancient power. Elias watched in growing horror as something began to change in Duncan's eyes, a distant look, as if he was seeing places and people that existed only in memory. Duncan, she called softly, but he didn't seem to hear her. His movements had taken on a rhythm that felt older than human thought, guided by knowledge that wasn't his own. The hammer rose and fell with perfect precision, shaping the star metal into something that hummed with inner light. What's happening to him? Robert Campbell demanded, his hand tight on his sword hilt. What is that cursed magic doing to my cousin? Father Brendan's face was grave as he watched the ritual unfold. The old powers are claiming what was promised, he said quietly. Duncan is giving up pieces of himself to forge something greater than either of them could be alone. Around the altar, the air began to shimmer like heat waves, rising from summer stone. Elias could see glimpses of things that shouldn't exist, shadowy figures from ages past, watching with approval as their ancient law was fulfilled. The very trees seemed to lean inward, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. Then Duncan stumbled, nearly dropping his hammer. When he looked up, his eyes were confused and frightened. Who are you people? He asked, staring at the faces around him as if he'd never seen them before. Where am I? Elias's heart shattered like glass. The ritual was stealing his memories, just as Father Brendan had warned. Soon, the man she loved would be gone forever, replaced by someone who knew only duty and ancient purpose. No, she whispered. Then louder, no. Stop this. I don't want the spear if it costs him his soul. She lunged forward, trying to knock the hammer from Duncan's hands, but an invisible force held her back. The ritual had its own momentum now, like a river in flood that couldn't be turned aside by human will. "Duncan, remember me?" she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Remember the day you found me?
What?
Remember why you wanted to help? Remember that you have a choice?"
What?
For a moment, Duncan's eyes cleared. "Elias," he said uncertainly,
What?
"I remember your face. But everything else is like fog. Who was I before this moment?" "You were kind," she said desperately. "You were the man who saved his enemy because it was right. You were someone who chose love over hate, hope over despair. You were perfect just as you were." Put the star medal on. The altar pulsed with brilliant light, and Duncan's body jerked as if struck by lightning. When the glow faded, a new spear lay where the raw metal had been, beautiful beyond description, its blade seeming to hold captured starlight. But Duncan had collapsed beside it, breathing hard and staring at nothing. "It is done," Father Brendan announced solemnly. "The weapon is reforged, and the Guardian has her chosen protector." But Elias barely heard him. She knelt beside Duncan, taking his face in her hands. His eyes were open, but empty, like windows in an abandoned house. "Duncan, can you hear me?" He blinked slowly, then sat up with mechanical precision. Looked at her. There was recognition, but no warmth. "I am your protector," he said in a voice that sounded like his but felt hollow. "I live to serve your purpose." The words hit her like physical blows. This wasn't Duncan anymore. It was a stranger wearing his face, shaped by ancient magic into something useful, but no longer human. She had gained a weapon and a guardian, but lost the man who had chosen to love her despite everything that should have kept them apart. "I don't want a servant," she said fiercely. "I want you back." She picked up the new spear, and power flowed through her like lightning. Her injuries healed instantly, and she could feel the strength of her ancestors flowing in her veins. But the weapon felt cold in her hands, beautiful but heartless as winter stars around them. Both clans were staring in awe and fear. The ritual had worked exactly as the ancient laws demanded. Elias was a guardian again, more powerful than any who had come before her. Duncan was bound to her service, transformed into the perfect protector. Everything was as it should be, according to prophecies written before their great-grandparents were born, but everything was wrong. In the distance, war horns began to sound. The Viking raiders were coming, just as Father Brendan had predicted. They had learned about the sacred grove somehow, and they were bringing their full force to stop the new guardian before she could threaten their plans. "We have to go," Robert Campbell said urgently. "There are too many of them to fight here." But Elias barely heard the approaching danger. She was staring at Duncan, who stood ready to follow her commands with perfect obedience and no trace of the man who had once comforted her pain and shared his dreams of a better world. Then, through the sound of approaching enemies, she heard something that made her heart leap, children's voices, crying for help.
Ow.
The raiders had brought their captives, with them probably planning to use them as shields. Little Thomas, sweet Beth, all the others she had failed to protect. "The children are with them," she said, gripping her spear tighter. "We have to save them." "You're not strong enough," her Uncle Kenneth protested. "Guardian or not, there are too many raiders." "Then we fight together," she said firmly, looking between the MacLeod and Campbell warriors. "All of us. Our children are worth more than our old grudges." For a moment, both clans hesitated. Then Robert Campbell stepped forward, drawing his sword. "She's right," he said grimly. "Some things matter more than family feuds." The battle that followed was like nothing from the old stories. Elias fought, with power that seemed to flow from the earth itself, her new spear cutting through enemy weapons like they were made of straw. The Highland warriors fought with desperate courage, protecting not just their own people, but each other's children. But it was Duncan who turned the tide. In the heat of battle, as he threw himself between Elias and a raider's axe, something sparked in his empty eyes. Not magic this time, but something deeper, the memory of why he had chosen this path in the first place. "I remember," he gasped as they fought side by side. "Not everything, but enough. I remember choosing to help you. I remember why that mattered." Relief flooded through Elias like warm sunlight. "You're still you," she said, blocking a sword thrust meant for his back. "Not exactly," Duncan admitted, his own blade finding its mark. "But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe becoming something new doesn't mean losing what made us who we were." When the last raider fell and the children were safely in there, family's arms, Alia's and Duncan's, stood together in the dawn light. Around them, MacLeod and Campbell warriors were sharing water and tending each other's wounds without a thought for clan loyalty. "What happens now?" Duncan asked quietly. "I'm still bound to you by the old laws, still changed by the ritual." Looked at the spear in her hands, then at the man beside her who had given up everything to forge it. "No, we make our own laws," she said. "We build something better than what came before." She took his hand, feeling the calluses from years of honest work, the strength that came from choosing to help rather than harm. "I don't want a servant or a guardian bound by ancient magic. I want a partner. Someone who chooses to stand with me every day, not because he has to, but because he wants to." Duncan smiled, and for the first time since the ritual, it reached his eyes. "I can live with that," he said. "I think I'd like it very much." In the months that followed, they built a new settlement where the boundaries of their old territories met. A place where children could grow up without learning to hate their neighbors, where old wisdom and new hope could flourish together. And if their love story became legend, it's told around fires for generations to come, it wasn't because of magic, spears, or ancient prophecies. It was because they proved that sometimes the greatest power is simply choosing to see the humanity in those we're supposed to fear. Their chosen love became the foundation for a better world, one family at a time.